Hello, and thank you all for joining us today for this discussion on transforming Milwaukee's transportation sector. Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Richard Diaz. I am the Midwest Regional Field Organizer for the BlueGreen Alliance. We have a great group of speakers joining us today to talk about how the investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law will impact their industries and what more is needed to ensure that the federal funding available is used in smart ways to maximize the benefits to all Milwaukeeans. The new infrastructure law makes huge investments in transportation. For example, it allocates at least $5 billion and up to $7.5 billion towards the construction of a robust nationwide and public EV charging network, up to $5 billion to transition the nation's school bus fleet to zero emissions school buses, and approximately $5.6 billion for public transit and bus electrification. That funding is historic, but more remains to be done. For example, while transit funding received a significant investment in the bipartisan infrastructure law, much more is needed to meet the current $176 billion backlog in transit needs. Additionally, the funding provided to the transition to electric school buses and install EV charging stations is also historic, but it's not enough to meet our nation's goals for either of those efforts. That's why it's so important that in addition to the bipartisan infrastructure law, members of Congress work together to get a strong budget reconciliation bill across the finish line. The House has done its job by passing the Build Back Better Act. Now it's time for the Senate to get to work and get a strong pro-worker, pro-climate budget reconciliation bill to the president's desk. In the meantime, we are now tasked with implementing the investments included in the historic bipartisan infrastructure law. For the city of Milwaukee, one major concern is about the size and capacity of our transportation workforce and its ability to upscale its operations so that many underserved communities can capitalize on the federal investments of the bill. Our speakers today will offer unique perspectives on how to address this challenge and what the funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law will mean for their industries and communities. To kick us off, I'm honored to introduce State Representative Supreme Moore Okamunde. Thank you, Supreme.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Richard, for allowing me to be here today. The first thing that I want to talk about really is how important this is. Again, my name is Supreme Moore Omokunde. I am the state representative representing the 17th Assembly District, which is the northwest side of the city of Milwaukee. I sit on the Energy and Utilities Committee. I also sit on the Regulatory Licensing and Reform Committee, the Mental Health Committee, and the Transportation Committee. And what's really important about today is having a conversation about transportation. We know that transit is one of the big markers that puts together and emits a lot of the gas, the greenhouse gas emissions into our environment. So to that effort, we need to be getting more internal combustion engine vehicles off the road and more electric vehicles on the road. We can do that through our personal vehicles. We can do that through public transit, school buses, and all sorts of transportation challenges that we may or may not have. And so what we need to do is look at this, the BIL, the infrastructure legislation that has come down from the federal government, all the dollars that Mr. Diaz told you about, that they're going to build this robust electric vehicle system throughout the country. We need to make sure that we are partnering on the federal level, on the state level, and on the local level, making sure that we are getting these dollars and putting them to use to help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Folks, 2030 is right around the corner. We need to make sure that our planet is not warming past 2 degrees Celsius to cause catastrophic effects on our planet. So to that effort, we need to be making sure we have a robust transit system. You're going to hear from a lot of folks today, folks that are going to talk about what it means to be in the business of transitioning our transit system. You're going to hear from folks who are going to talk about the work that needs to be done. And you're going to hear a lot about electric vehicles and what that means to our economy and what it means to the state of Wisconsin and things that we need to do. We need to get a robust public transit system. We need to get folks on buses and on public transit, utilize them, walking neighborhoods, et cetera. Not only does it make us physically healthier, it makes our environment healthier as well. And I am going to sit back and let people have conversations with me, have them have conversations with you. We need to get these bills passed at the state, at the federal level, and we need to talk about what our investment will be at the state level as well. I've had some great conversations with the governor of Wisconsin, Governor Evers. I've had some great conversations with some of my colleagues about some of the things that we can do. One of the biggest things we can do is to put our money where our mouth is and invest in the future of our state, our city, our county, our federal government, and our planet as a whole. If anybody has any questions, they can ask me a little bit later. I'm going to pass it back to you, Richard.
Thank you for those remarks, Supreme. Very well said. I'd like to now introduce my colleague, Robert Hansen, from the office of Congresswoman Gwen Moore. Robert?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Supreme. Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to be here this morning on behalf of Congresswoman Gwen Moore's office. Very much look forward to hearing the discussion that we're going to be having here today. As you know, the bipartisan infrastructure bill represents an important and long overdue investment, not only to repair and improve our nation's roads, bridges, and ports, but also to remove lead service lines and address the climate crisis by building an energy transition infrastructure necessary to facilitate our switch to clean and renewable energy sources. This does all this while creating high-paying union jobs, and that will help to bring financial benefits from these investments back into our own communities. The Congresswoman is particularly excited about the bill's provisions to provide $3 billion annually for 5 years to remove and replace lead laterals. That's a crucial issue here in Milwaukee, which has an estimated 70,000 such pipes. Getting rid of those lines is a victory for public health and the well-being of children in Milwaukee, and will also help to create jobs. The EPA recently announced that some of the funding from the infrastructure bill will be used to clean up an area of concern in Milwaukee, which is removing contaminated sediments and allowing the revitalization of the area. There's largely areas that are largely off limits to the public as part of the Great Lakes restoration. This bill represents a huge victory for the Congresswoman's priorities in public transportation. The bill's $89.9 billion investment in green and efficient public transit is a historic investment, is a historic level of funding. And for too long, divestment in public busing, train, and alternative transportation infrastructure has hit underserved minority and low-income communities the hardest. These populations depend on such investments to access jobs, resources, and recreation. We're still waiting for more information to be released on how the public transit funds will be rolled out, but the Congresswoman and the rest of her staff are following along closely to ensure that Milwaukee sees this benefit of the benefit of these public resources, and help provide those jobs and improvements to our public infrastructure. Very excited today to introduce the panel that we have. First up, we have Tom Bennett, someone I've had the pleasure of knowing for a long time. He's a third-generation Teamster. This is his 16th year as an elected officer of the General Teamsters Local Union 200. He is the Secretary Treasurer of Local 200. Tom oversees the day-to-day operation of the local union that covers southeastern Wisconsin, working with the membership to build a strong and united Teamster organization. Tom actively serves as the Secretary Treasurer of the Wisconsin Teamsters Joint Council number 39, union trustee with the Wisconsin Health Fund, and serves as union trustee to the IBT Consolidated Pension Fund. Also joining us, we have Tom Kennedy. Tom, for 31 years, has been working for employers affiliated with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 494. He is a Local 494 electrical apprenticeship instructor, Wisconsin licensed master electrician and commercial electrical inspector, electric vehicle infrastructure training program instructor trainer at Milwaukee Electrical JATC, which is a newer facility over on Layton Avenue where the old ITT building was, across from the Greenfield High School. We also have Megan Severson joining us today. Megan is the state director of the Wisconsin Environment. Megan has over 15 years of organizing experience working on campaigns to combat climate change and move towards zero carbon transportation. Megan currently serves on the Education and Outreach Group for the Milwaukee City County Task Force on Climate Change and Economic Equity, and is working to help school districts across Wisconsin secure grants for electric school buses. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Richard.
Thank you for that, Robert. All right, now what I'd like to do is jump into some posed questions we have for our different panelists, and we'll go panelist by panelist with a few different questions. First, let's start with you, Mr. Tom Kennedy of IBEW. As we've learned, there are some heavy investments in the federal infrastructure package towards building EV charging stations. What are the skill sets needed to build these thousands of EV charging stations across the country and here in the city of Milwaukee?
I think I could start out by saying that the skills that we train in the IBEW NECA Milwaukee Electrical JTC apprenticeship program is that everyday electrician pipe and wire skills. The EV part of that is there's some additional opportunities in our training program to train those technologies associated with the electric vehicles. This past year, we've added the EVITP into our apprenticeship, and we offer it as continuing education for all our members, so that those tweaks to how we install electricity are addressed in that EVITP. And that EVITP training, it goes on beyond just your regular electrician training. Those are some of the special skills, in which our apprenticeship does special skills in other areas, but that's just one of our focus areas in our training program. The part of that training is making sure that, when we have electricians out there installing this EV equipment, that they're making sure that these installations not only comply with the electrical codes and are installed properly and safely, but they're also complying with building codes and American Disabilities Act requirements and parking requirements and access and stuff like that. So those are the skills that we have to bring back and do some additional training in our programs. So make sure that everybody is ready to go for the demands that these expansion of the EV charging system is going to be. One other thing that is quickly being identified is that a lot of people that are going to be buying these EVs are going to want to charge at home, and any home built before 1990 doesn't really have the capacity to have these charging systems. So we're looking at a lot of homes that are going to require some updating of their electrical services and electrical systems and the utility grid that comes to those. So that's not just installing the electrical outlets, but it's going to be those skills of updating all these electrical services and making sure these homes have safe installations for EV charging, and we don't have improper installations that create shock and electrical fire hazards. There's also some other things that we're looking at in our program is the upcoming technologies with some of these EVs. You may have seen in some of the cars, they're doing the bi-directional power, where you can power your home from the vehicle, or you charge the vehicle from your home. And those are additional skills that we're including in our program and looking at expanding into our training in our program. That is going to be a very interesting expansion of the EV market, is that not only will you be able to use your home power to power your vehicle, but then you also have your vehicle that could possibly power your home. So those are additional skills. And then we can get into the whole aspect of the fast charging. And that's where people start looking at EVs and they're thinking, okay, it's just like a gas pump. I go up to the gas pump, I fill my car up with electrons, and then I go off my merry way. These are definitely needed items, but the expansion of the EV market is going to be both also the home charging and the fast charging. And those fast charging units are some large power requirement units. We're looking at, in excess of a 0.5 megawatt for some of these charging stations where they have multiple stations. And so that's a large level of electrical workers knowledge that's going to be needed to put in those services and stuff like that. So we can give people that gas and go option of electric vehicle transit, that they can use their electric vehicle similar to use a gasoline engine, with how the technology and charging is going out. So there's a lot of skills in this electric vehicle market, but I think it's a lot of expansion on the existing electrician skills and fine tuning skills, just like, you know, working in healthcare or working in other specific type of occupancies. It's just a matter of tweaking what we do and make sure we're covering, you know, everything from batteries to lighting. That's what we do.
Thanks for that answer, Tom. You know, on our prep call the other day, you mentioned that you've owned an EV for some years now. Can you walk us through what it's like to own an electric vehicle?
I could say didn't take long for me to get used to the idea of leaving my house every morning with a full tank of battery. I drive an electric Volt. It does have the range extender on there, but I primarily drive only on electric. I live close enough to where I work that, you know, I plug my car in, it charges overnight, and I get up in the morning and I leave the house every day with a full tank of battery. It's a nice feature to get used to. It's if you think about driving a gasoline car, you always got to look at your gas gauge and wonder when you got to stop for gas. I've lost that need. I literally, you know, leave my house every day with that full charge. I plug it in every night and I charge my vehicle, and I don't see the gas station, you know, in my daily life. And you know, there's some definite advantages to having that, because you don't have that. The idea of range anxiety, that left really quick, because you know, you learn very fast that, oh, yep, every day I can get back and forth to work and I'm not driving on gasoline, I'm driving primarily on electric. My car does have the range extender gasoline engine in it, but I could easily get by most days without that. I rarely have a gas engine turning on. And so that's something that I got used to really early on, is that, you know, people are looking at the higher model EVs where they want that 200, 300, 400-mile range battery, and in your daily life, it's really not, to me, it's really not necessary. You know, that smaller range, the lighter vehicle is going to be where everybody's going to find the sweet spot. It's getting that behavior change to make people realize that that's what we can do, and it's easily accomplished.
Yeah, and I hear that, Tom. And you know, in your opening remarks, you alluded to EV charging stations, and you know, some work that is still going to be needed for folks to be able to charge their EV charging stations from home. So, you know, in terms of low-income communities, you know, rural communities where, you know, we can't walk outside right now and see EV charging stations, you know, how can we make EV charging stations more accessible to communities?
That is definitely a challenge. I mean, if from the urban to the rural, we're gonna have to do some changes in how we think about things. You know, if you think about an urban market, that or urban area where people don't necessarily have a garage to park in or a driveway to park in, that they may be stuck doing street parking, that's where some, you know, municipal decisions can be made to provide parking areas, or have agreements with businesses, or provide incentives to businesses to be able to charge at your place of work, so that when you're at home and can't charge, you can still use an EV. You know, other areas where you park for a longer period of time, that you can go and do that. So at a grocery store, and an entertainment venue, a movie theater, something like that, where you can have those access to the EV charging infrastructure, that'll give you that opportunity to own an EV. Whereas, you know, it's not just somebody who's got a 2-car garage and a 3.5 children home type of thing, that you know, it's easily available and accessible to people in those urban areas. And then on the other respect of that is in some of the rural areas, you know, you got a lot of distance between homes in that, and not a lot of charging for those longer traveling trips. And so somebody who drives maybe 200 miles, you know, every 2 days, or 200 miles a day, they may not have the ability to charge where they're working to get back home type of thing, if they have a shorter range EV. So it's not just an urban problem, it's a rural problem. And another thing about the rural problem is, you know, these DC fast charging, you know, the gas and go kind of chargers, those require a lot of power. And currently the electrical grid, you know, in some areas may not be able to support that level of power. So there's some growth in the distribution in the power grid to make sure that those you can provide. I believe it was in, you know, looking at one DC fast charging every 50 miles on the interstate, and then looking at state highways that have that, you know, think about how many gas stations there are between here and Madison. There's not as many EV charging stations, and that's something that the state government and local governments have to look at, providing that access to that charging for the people who do need on a traveling trip to gas and go kind of a thing.
Yeah, you also mentioned the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program, also known as the EVITP. And considering that, many labor disciplines across the country are having worker shortages or workforce development challenges, what support is needed from city, county, and state governments to ramp up our training electricians to install these EV charging stations?
That's kind of I kind of look at it towards a threefold issue. You also, you make a great point. One of the things that we need to do is add that capital funding for the training programs themselves to get this EV equipment in the technical colleges and JATC training centers, so that there's enough equipment for everybody to be able to commission all the types and sizes. And as technology changes, to continuously fund to get the new equipment so that we can train those new skills. And that the EVITP that's the credential that an electrician earns, which gives them the credential saying that, okay, I've learned all of those focus areas of ADA access, the types of charging equipment there is, the types of design criteria that's required for all of these EV installations. That's what that EVITP credential gives an electrician. You have to be an electrician first to get that. We train this in our apprenticeship, but it's a credential that they'll get at completion of their apprenticeship. It's not something that they get right away. You can't take somebody and tell them, okay, go do an online EVITP class and now you can install EV chargers. No, you have to be an electrician. You have to know the skills of being an electrician, and then you can grow and earn that additional credential. Just like a journeyman becomes a master electrician, this is just a little niche part of that training. And then the second part about the need for people to install EV is getting the word out that the skilled trade is a great way to make a living. All skilled tradesmen can tell you that if you're doing a job as a skilled tradesman, there's times where you can talk to somebody and you're like, wow, I'm making just as much as somebody with a master's degree. Each job market has their different applications of their training, but an electrician can make a really good living, and a lot of people don't see that as that is right from high school, we'll be an electrician, you'll be just fine the rest of your life. And the third part of that, I think, it adds on to this, is that our viewpoint of the trades and how people need to come and explore the trades in the high schools and everybody's focused to go to college. And sometimes, they don't understand that in our electrical apprenticeship, they do 34 credits of college with Milwaukee Area Technical College, and they are in those credits. And then they do 8,000 hours of on-the-job training. If you look at a similar intern work reward program, Marquette University and UWM, they give you 3 credits for 240 hours worth of intern work. If you translate that to 8,000 hours of OJT, you could look at apprentices, if you equated that experience equally, that's anywhere from 30 to 100 credits. But nobody looks at an electrical apprenticeship as equivalent to a degree program. They're a skilled worker, they're a trades worker. Trades workers are great people, and I think people need to understand that coming into the trades is a great opportunity. And that's where I think some of the support could be, is to take some of that government money and try to get people recruited into the trades programs, along with supporting the training for the trades.
Right there with you, Tom. Last question for you. If somebody is interested in becoming an electrician to help the nation reach its goals, what does somebody need to do to get started?
I put it on my background. IBEW 494, their website has information on our apprenticeship and our construction wireman program. And the Milwaukee Electrical JATC handles all the apprenticeship applications and training. And those are the phone numbers and the websites. Go there. You'll find contact information. And people can, they could start the application for apprenticeship today. We don't limit when we take applications. They're continuously taken all year round. We place apprentices at certain times of year, so you don't get placed in apprenticeship right away. But we also have opportunities for people to come and get introduced into the trade and work into the trade even before apprenticeship. They can work as like a helper on a job. And these EV installations are definitely going to need people that, you know, can be on that job and be a helper. They may not be the guy doing the final connections of the communication with the cell phone modem or whatever we're doing, but they're that guy there that's, you know, he's helping install the pipe and pull the wire and doing everything that an electrician can do and learning those skills.
Great, thank you, Tom. Next, I'd like to move on to another Tom, Mr. Tom Bennett of the Teamsters.
Good morning. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning. Good morning. First question for you, Tom, is, you know, you guys do a lot of driving with the Teamsters. How do you think the transition to electric vehicles will affect your industry?
One of the reasons that we're having this conversation is about transition, right? We're a small part of the stakeholders of the transition. We have to have communications with elected officials, business leaders, community groups. We have to educate and communicate what's going on in the transportation industry. There's a big push. A majority of the states are looking to cut or eliminate greenhouse gases, right? Driven by diesel fuel, diesel trucks, gasoline powered trucks. 70% of the goods in America are transported by trucks. So we leave our footprint behind. And the footprint we have left behind, we've got to change. And one of the changes we can do is this transition from the diesel gasoline into the electric vehicle era, right? We can't leave anybody behind in this transition. We have to make it affordable for the guy who has 1 or 2 trucks or a small business on the northwest side of Milwaukee to the guy that has 1,000 trucks on the south side of Milwaukee. Everybody's got to have a level playing field when it comes to electric vehicles, right? The cost right now, it's coming down because technology is changing, right? I think we all remember when we bought our first cell phone, like, oh my God, this is expensive. Prices have reduced, but technology keeps increasing, which is going to help in the transition. The transition into electric vehicles, either a fuel cell electric vehicle or battery vehicle, the transition will depend upon how it's engineered. Are we looking at a regional implementation? Trying to make it work cross country is going to be difficult. I mean, let's look at Ryan Road down on the south side of Milwaukee. We have truck stops down there that house a couple hundred trucks a night, just for someplace to stay, someplace to fuel up and get back on the road to take the goods from Milwaukee to Boston, right? We have to think about the big picture, right? There's a huge picture here. How are we going to build these charging locations for these electric Class 8 semis that are hauling goods across the United States? Right now, the range for those trucks is pretty short. So is the solution, the primary solution, looking at our regional area? Let's take Milwaukee, for example. We've learned during the pandemic that we relied on the delivery of goods, next day, same day goods. So the transition, I think, is going to be, for us, Milwaukee is an opportunity that should be explored by all the stakeholders, developers of the technology, the builders of the equipment, the engineers, all the trades, elected officials. We should be looking at Milwaukee as a place to engineer how do we use electric vehicles to transport goods from north side of Milwaukee to the south side, from the north side to Kenosha, back from Kenosha back to the city and our community. So the transition is going to take all of us being educated and having continuing meetings like this, and not say tomorrow's never going to come, because tomorrow's here today.
I completely agree, Tom. And, you know, you kind of alluded to the answer to my next question and, you know, what kind of support is needed. But, you know, as you guys are operating a few 100,000 trucks across the country, you know, what kind of support is needed to support your union to successfully transition to electric vehicles?
I think the support that is needed, and I appreciate the Biden administration He's talking about good paying jobs. He's talking about retirement security. He's talking about healthcare. That's all part of this equation because we have to bring people back into the transportation industry. We've had a lot of people leave the transportation industry for numerous reasons, but we have the ability now to say, hey, we're going to change the industry by the introduction of electric vehicles. Now, if we're going to talk about driverless vehicles, that's a conversation for another day. Today, we're talking about the introduction of electric vehicles and how do we support that transition, or how do we engage the conversation that it's going to take a period of time to get the end result we're looking for. This is not about flipping a light switch, right? We have to understand that we all have to support each other, from the electricians to the iron workers to the operating engineers. We have the ability right now to build the future for people that are now entering school, right? We're looking at 2030 for a goal. We're looking at 2050 for a goal. I'm going to be retired by then. It's up to us to build the future, and we need to support each other and support the technology by having these meetings, having these conversations, building the infrastructure to say electricity, electric vehicles is our path for the future.
Very strong response, Tom. And you seem like an individual who is incredibly fired up, and you understand why this is needed for our future. Can you share a little bit about how your union has contributed to the advocacy of the transition to electric vehicles?
So one of the things that our union has is, we'll use UPS for an example. They're one of our largest Teamster employers, right? And they're global. And that's one of the components that we need to be talking about. We're here talking about Milwaukee, but we have cities that are connected to Milwaukee, outside of Milwaukee, that we should be having conversations with. How is UPS using the electric vehicles in your city? Our climate, we have 4 climates in Milwaukee. There's other parts of the world that have 4 climates also. We should be having the conversation. What obstacles did you hit? What technology did you change to beat those obstacles? So we have to be able to look at it as a big, big picture. And just, I think at the end of the day, is understanding that the Teamsters are supportive of eliminating greenhouse gases, right? We have to better our environment, right? There's no doubt about it. For a lot of years, for the last decade, there's been a lot of discussion about changing from diesel to compressed gases, right? That's been a slow buy-in. We've seen some of the changes with some of our employers using other compressed gas, right? We have employers that are able to purchase and test electric vehicles. And we have to make sure that these employers, these Teamster employers, and our Teamster brothers and sisters are communicating to each other and to individuals across America. What are the pluses? What are the minuses? What are we learning? What didn't we know? What do we know now? So I'm proud of my Teamster organization. We attend hearings in Washington. We attend stakeholder meetings like this to build our community better. I'm proud of the city of Milwaukee. I made a comment the other day. Milwaukee is the train that runs the state of Wisconsin. We're the economic machine, right? But Milwaukee, we need to understand that Milwaukee services Kenosha. Milwaukee services Green Bay, and in return, those communities service us. We can make the connection through high-speed rail, the use of electricity, and cleaning the environment.
Great, thank you. Tom Bennett, everybody from the Teamsters. Next, we'll be switching gears a little bit and speaking more about the environmental aspect of the transition to EVs. Next, I'd like to call on Megan Severson from Wisconsin Environment. Hey, Megan.
Hi.
First question for you is, how will transportation electrification, specifically through programs established and funded in the bipartisan infrastructure law, how will those programs benefit air quality in local communities?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Richard, and thanks for having me here. Thanks to the BlueGreen Alliance for organizing this conversation about the future of transportation in Wisconsin, and how it impacts our health and our climate. I'll just say I'm also very excited by the leadership, represented here on this call from the local, state, and national levels, and just the need, for Congress to get the job done on Build Back Better. So, how we get around has a huge impact, obviously, on our climate and our environment, but also on our health and our happiness. Specifically, I want to talk a bit about the role that school buses play in our communities, and what opportunity we have right now to really move towards clean electric school buses for our kids. So every day across the country, buses carry millions of children to school, across Wisconsin and across the country. We put trust in these big yellow buses and their drivers to get our kids to school on time and safely. But the vast majority of America's school buses are still powered by diesel. This is a dirty fossil fuel that releases toxic emissions. It pollutes our communities. It endangers the health of the children who ride them, who are like my son is a third grader. They wait on the sidewalk while the buses are idling to get on the bus. So, nearly 95% of the nation's school buses still run on diesel. We know that diesel is linked to serious health risks, including increased rates of respiratory diseases and cancer. And this has also been shown to worsen existing conditions like asthma, especially among children. So diesel exhaust, I think internationally, is actually recognized as a cancer-causing agent and is classified as a likely carcinogen. So the U.S., we've seen a lot of progress in the, electric vehicle adoption, and increasingly for electric buses. And especially for school districts right now, over 1,800 electric school buses have been committed by 354 school districts across the country, and that's in 36 different states. But for Wisconsin, there's a lot of work yet to do to really fully electrify, all of our school district fleets. So I think as we move ahead with just electric buses overall, we should do it in a way that really maximizes the benefits. And I can't think of a better way than really starting with our schools and helping these school districts get the support they need to move into the new future of buses with electric fleets.
Great, thank you for that, Megan. Next question is, how do the bipartisan infrastructure laws, investments in electric vehicle deployment and infrastructure and installation advance our climate goals?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I know it's one that so many of us just across the state are really excited about what this could mean for seriously tackling our pollution in Wisconsin and moving us more towards a carbon-free future. Transportation is the nation's leading source of global warming causing carbon dioxide. It's second in Wisconsin right now after coal-fired power plants for the time being. We already have the technology to start building cleaner, healthier cities and neighborhoods. And so, I think these investments are really going to help, like I talked about, transition to all electric school bus fleets, and to help communities get just off and running on electric. Transitioning to all electric school bus fleets would avert 5.3 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions nationally each year, and obviously have the added benefits of cleaning our air and protecting the health of our children. And then, presumably over time, this also helps to save school districts money and to instead invest in the classroom and teachers. So the new infrastructure law, has already provided a huge opportunity for us to transition our school buses in Wisconsin. But then building on this, we really need Congress to pass the investments included in Build Back Better to help school districts and communities, transition their fleets, get the resources they need to just have this be the future of electric buses for our kids across Wisconsin.
Thank you, Megan. Anything else you'd like to share with our audience today?
No, this is a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan. Next, I'd like to turn it over to our keynote speaker for a few questions to ask how we can engage at the state level to support the bipartisan infrastructure laws investments. Rep. Supreme Moore Omokunde, can you tell us how state and local governments can work together to help reduce the carbon footprint of our transportation systems?
Well, I think what I spoke about earlier is just knowing that there has to be an investment made. And our federal government is making that investment. For those of you who watched the State of the Union on Tuesday, the president talked about the 500 or so EVs he was going to build across the country. That's going to take money that we're going to get from the federal government. However, we need to make sure that our local governments are invested as well. I think Tom Kennedy spoke to it earlier. I'm looking at both the times that were great. I think Tom Kennedy spoke to it earlier, and forgive me if I'm getting the wrong time, where we talked about in urban areas, everybody doesn't have a garage. And so we need to be able to go to places where we can charge our electric vehicles. We need to get more electric vehicles on the road. And I think Megan talked about great when we talked about buses, school buses. I know when I was on the county board, the Milwaukee County Board, we were starting a pilot program dealing with some of our electric buses for the Milwaukee County transit system. Some of them are going on the road now. And we have to make sure that we're able to deal with them in extreme condition weather. So extreme weather conditions, extreme cold and extreme heat. Those are challenges that these buses have. And so now we're able to test that out to make sure that we're improving them as much as possible. But like I said, it's going to take a lot of investment, and understanding that it's going to take investment, and local government and also state government have to be a part of that investment, and they have to be partners as well. Because right now, if you have an electric vehicle, you can go to there's a Kohl's shopping center, or there's a parking lot right behind Brady Street, and I think there may be one other on the south side that if you have an electric vehicle, you can go charge there. We need more of those because not everybody's going to have a garage. And then we need to have alternative charging sources like solar powered charging, EV charging. I sit on the Assembly's Energy and Utilities Committee. We had a bill come out about EV charging stations where folks want to totally get government out of the way and say, we want to have EV charging stations, but we don't want to have local governments having anything to do with them. We don't want them to operate them. We don't want them to manage them. We just want the federal government to maybe build the infrastructure, but we want them to be all private. And then myself and my colleague, Deb Andraka, we put together an amendment talking about solar power charging. It's very, very less emitting for greenhouse gas emissions. And it's a really great way to charge electric vehicles. And it was not even looked at. And so what we need to do is make sure that we're looking at all of our options for charging and all of our options for making sure that everybody's involved in the process.
Great. Next question for you is, how can state and local governments facilitate the equitable distribution of investments from the bipartisan infrastructure law?
We have to be intentional. One of the things that I did on the county board is we created the City County Task Force on Climate and Economic Equity, because we talked about climate change and climate justice. However, we also have to talk about economic equity and community equity, jobs equity, et cetera. We had to put those two things together because these are both existential crises that we're facing at the same time. So if we're going to talk about Black and brown folks getting jobs in this new industry, because there are a lot of folks that see that this new energy, this green energy thing is a thing. So I want to get in line. I want to make my money off of it. If I own a gas station, I want to be able to have, a quick charging station right there. So when you pull up with your Bolt, or you pull up with your Tesla, whatever you have, you can pull up and get your electricity right there at the same time. So it's going to be very intentional. And that's another conversation that we have to have too, about electricity being a utility or a fuel, and having that dialogue as well. But it's going to be some very intentional conversations and some very intentional things that we do to make sure that there's equity. Because if we're not intentional, there will be inequity, because that's part of the course. That's what's happened. That's what happens when you don't think about it intentionally.
We have to be intentional about it. Thank you for that, Rep. Omokunde. What additional support is needed, whether financial or technical assistance, to help state and local governments drive this work?
Well, I'll say this. We need to make sure that we recognize the need for local control and the need for local conversations, because every city, state, municipality, et cetera, has its own nuances. And we have to recognize those nuances and making sure that we are holding space for those nuances to take place. That being said, we can't lock local government out of the conversation. There are a lot of people who say, well, we're getting these ARPA dollars. Well, let's get them and spend them the way that we want to spend them, or let's spend them and allow the private sector to come in and just let the market determine how things are going to be. We cannot lock local government out of the process, because when something needs to happen, if there are tripwires somewhere in this process, if we need to roll things back and there needs to be some accountability and we need to regulate things a certain way, whose responsibility is that going to be? That's still going to fall on local government. However, you lock them out of the first part of the conversation. So we can't lock local government and state government out of these conversations. And we have to realize that we're going to have to spend certain amounts of money anyway. Do we want to spend it on the front end, or do we want to spend it on the back end? Because if we look at our planet and our planet is warming, we don't want to get to the point where we're spending emergency dollars to keep bridges afloat because we have high tides coming in, et cetera. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our greenhouse gas emissions down, so that's preventing some of these catastrophic weather conditions. And so let's spend this money on the front end and not spend it on the back end. And as far as transportation is concerned, we need to make sure, really radical idea, we need to get more vehicles off the road. We need a robust public transit system where folks can feel obligated to use the public transit system to get to work, et cetera. Somebody mentioned in one of the questions, what about a train from Milwaukee to Madison? That was one of the greatest travesties when we kicked Talgo out of the state of Wisconsin. Because I'd love, I have to go to Madison. I'd love to be able to just jump on a train and get from Milwaukee to Madison, and it take less time, and I'm not in a car. I have a colleague, Deb Andraka, who has an electric vehicle. She'd love to drive her electric vehicle from Milwaukee to Madison and have the infrastructure to be able to charge, to be able to get back home on that same day. And so we need to make sure that we're getting less vehicles off the road. We need to, because if you build a larger freeway, more cars will come. If you build it, they will come. So we need to make sure that we're getting more vehicles off the roads, have walkable neighborhoods, and have really fuel efficient electric fleets and public transit, et cetera. So we need to make sure that the local government is involved and we're getting less people on the roads.
Great, I love that, Rep. Moore. Less people off the road, more people walking on the streets. I see Megan nodding her head there. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for our panelists. I'd like to now turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Greg Neal.
Thank you, Richard. Hello, I'm Greg Neal with the BlueGreen Alliance. I'd like to just take a few words to close out our event today. First of all, I want to thank you to our panelists for a wonderful conversation. Your insight is truly invaluable. I also want to thank the Milwaukee Area Labor Council for being a co-host. We've learned a lot today about how the investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law will create good jobs and transform the jobs of our transportation workforce. all while reducing emissions and fighting climate change. These investments in our infrastructure are a long time coming, and it is so excited to see this coming together. The investments and policies included in the bipartisan infrastructure law are an important first step to rebuilding and modernizing our nation's crumbling infrastructure, including our transportation, water, and energy infrastructure. But as Richard noted at the top of this event, more is needed. Building back better is America's path toward a clean, prosperous, and equitable future. We need a recovery for America, by America, that addresses the intersecting crises of climate change, income inequality, and racial injustice, while creating high quality, good paying jobs and delivering a more equitable and cleaner economy. Now, it is time to act boldly and pass a pro-worker budget reconciliation bill that will invest in America to build a clean, prosperous, and equitable economy. I want to thank our representatives from around the state for being leaders. Congressional members, Representative Kind, Moore, and Pocan, and Senator Baldwin. Thank you. The House has done its job by passing the Build Back Better Act. Now it is time for senators to step up and pass a pro-worker, pro-climate action budget reconciliation bill and send it to President Biden's desk so we can have a recovery for America and by America.